Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to interview our guest today, Rob Snyder. Rob, founder of Waffle, writer. We got to find out when your book's coming out. I'm excited to read that. Product market fit expert. I don't know if you'd label yourself that, but I think you are. Excited to have you, Matt.
Yeah, it's fun to be here.
Awesome. Let's drive in. Want to keep this to about 30 minutes or so. As I said, you're a product market fit expert and you've lived it, and I follow your newsletter. It's awesome. We'll get you to share with everybody at the end on how they can get in touch with you and follow along. But you continue to refine your kind of thoughts and expertise on product market fit. But before we dive too deep, how would you describe product market fit?
Yeah, good question. It is, it's just magic. There's no possible definition for it. You're not allowed to define it. It's got to be something that, you just claim you have it. No.
And that's it. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all. Yeah, so product market fit is, the way I define it at least, is you are able to repeatedly sell and deliver and retain customers. And so I have a little bit more nuance to it. Like, I think of it as actually repeating one customer case study where the customer pulls more than you push to get the deal done and them successful. And so a lot of components there, but that's the general definition.
I love it. So let's unpack that a little bit. How do you see the phases of product market fit? How do you kind of classify from getting started all the way through to, hey, high conviction of strong product market fit?
Yeah, so when you start, you're like at basically negative product market fit, where you think you have product market fit. You're larping, you're doing like pitch competitions, and you're like, you're taking calls with potential customers, showing them your investor deck. They're like, wow, this is really interesting. You're like, all right, I've nailed it, right? So everyone goes through that stage, and that stage is really fun until reality hits and you still have $0 in revenue. And then eventually you get to the stage where you come up with kind of like a thesis, a hypothesis of, okay, I think we're going to sell this kind of thing to this kind of person. And early on, it kind of doesn't work. Sales is hard. It feels like you're speaking in a different language to them. In time, you wind up with one or two customers where they like actually like it. And so over time, you get from this kind of amorphous blob to, okay, this is the case study that we're repeating. And then over time, you get from, we have to push and force people through our sales process and to be successful, to like, oh, actually, we figured out that if we describe it this way and we target this kind of person, they hear us and they say, oh my God, like this is the greatest thing ever. And once you get towards that, that's when you're nearing product market fit. And when you're really at product market fit, you've found a growth lever that brings those people to you. So you're just like stuffing people into locker, not literally, but you have a way to generate these repeated case studies where customers say hell yes before and after they buy.
I love it. How would you, and I don't know if I've heard you talk much about this, but how would you overlay product and product development along that, right? Some people are saying build an MVP first. Some people are saying build your whole product first. Some people are saying build nothing, sell with slides. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I generally like lean towards selling with slides and delivering manually. We have this kind of like delusion in the software space that people are like in it to see the screens in a demo, and like that's what they're buying. They're buying the interface, and really what they're doing is they're trying to accomplish something in their lives, and they don't really care necessarily if you deliver that with a React front end and Postgres database and da, or if you deliver that value and help them accomplish their thing with like a trained pack of squirrels. Like, so what you tend to want to do up front is you want to figure out what are they actually trying to accomplish that we can help them with. Like, that's the most risky thing in the business. And then product is, once you understand what they're trying to accomplish, what options they've considered and how you might fit in there, then the product part becomes intuitive. If you try to figure out the product before that, you do a lot of complicated research and stuff, and you wind up with a bloated piece of shit that nobody wants.
Oh, but that part's so much fun, right? Because you get to build. You're like Thomas Edison, just building.
Yeah, you're just like, yeah, this is got to be how Elon Musk feels all day, right? Like
I love it. Well, let me hear a little bit about your journey in finding product market fit, because I've heard a good example you shared before that I think illustrates much of this.
Yeah, I mean, my story was I thought I was smart, and so I worked at McKinsey. I went to HBS, graduated HBS, raised some money for like a huge idea, and we'd done basically all the things I have said not to do
Yeah, that's
so
good.
far.
Usually takes
Just
one time around at least
yeah,
to kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
refine this.
Yeah, so you go and you do that like I did, and then reality just comes and like gives you a roundhouse kick to the teeth. And so that was my experience. We basically just suffered for 2 years with something we couldn't figure out, and we were just pivoting around aimlessly, trying to figure out, like, trying to come up with something and say, is it the product that's the problem? Are we just not good at sales? Is that the problem? Like, what is going, are we just not using the right growth tactics? So just kind of like struggled through that for 2 years, and then randomly got a phone call from someone I had tried to pitch to who was like, hey, listen, you're a tech guy. I don't want what you were trying to sell me, but if you can help me with this thing, I'll do it. And I was like, all right, screw it. And I did it in a spreadsheet, and like the business started working from there.
So finally listening to your customers. So let's talk about the term pain cave. You haven't used it yet. I love it. At first I was like, what? What is this guy talking about? Give it to me, man.
Yeah, that's basically how everyone reacts to me in
It's
general,
memorable.
which is a
Whoever's
problem.
listening is going to remember it forever.
Yeah. Yeah, so the pain cave is the place you go as you realize that you don't have product market fit, and all the research and analysis and like conviction you had leading up until now was like totally wrong in some way that you don't know. And so you're in this spot, which is pre-product market fit. You don't know exactly who to sell to, what to sell, what product they actually need. There are all these different variables in your head that you're trying to figure out. And yeah, it just feels like you're hitting your head against a wall repeatedly every single day, and there is no clear path out from there. And you can just kind of like live there forever. Most startups die there. Like that's why entrepreneurship sucks, is you just wind up realizing you're in the pain cave, and then maybe you get lucky and find a way out.
So what is the way, like, yeah, talk to me about
Yeah.
that. It sounds like you got lucky with the phone call, and you could
Yeah.
have told this story differently, that all of your wisdom allowed you to find the way out. Appreciate your honesty in that story.
Yeah. No.
What would you advise founders that are listening right now that are like, we've been at this for a while and we're in the pain cave. Like, what do we do now?
Yeah, I mean, so it's actually seen. The crazy thing is that basically every startup story goes like mine does. We just tell it differently after the fact, you know? And so if you listen to basically any entrepreneur story, like basically 99 point something percent of people spend some quality time in the pain cave. And everyone's path out is kind of similar, which is the weird thing that I learned only after emerging and like talking to other founders and being like, is this normal? And like the path out is usually kind of stupid. It's like either we just get lucky or we find one customer who says, oh wow, here's actually what I'm trying to do. Could you actually help me here? Right? And it's just find one, start there, and then look for another who's kind of like that and try to make that work better and better and better over time. It is just that simple.
Yeah, and I think in some of in your writing and in your interviews, you talk about not focusing on a persona or a company or an account, which we often want to do to suffice our total addressable market needs and this whole idea of business, right? Versus a human. So talk about how you kind of uncover that with dealing with an individual. How do you get that case study? How do you try to search for that if you're going to do it in a kind of methodical or practical way?
Yeah, so the way that I think about, like, the reason I don't like personas and thinking about companies and thinking about niches and stuff like that is just they're not real. And so you wind up crazily having to sell something to a real person at some point. And so to do that, like, somebody has to buy it. And so we need to focus on one real person who's got to accomplish something. And we can start just kind of like guessing and saying, hey, I talked to Seth last week. Seth was trying to accomplish this, but I just didn't hear him, and I was pitching my product. And so instead of me just going out there just slinging my product around, I'm instead going to write, Seth was trying to accomplish X, and we can help with Y. And that's a case study. And then you just go and you show that case study to Michael or Matt or Julie or whoever else and say, hey, I was just talking to Seth. Seth was trying to do X. We helped with Y. How are you different from that? And like, that's how you start to figure out and repeat the case study.
I love it. And before we began, we started talking about sales, and then I said, all right, let's get recording. We got to get this. We got to capture this. In your writing, it looks to me that you've kind of brought, and why I reached out to you for this interview. And thank you again for joining us. This is great. As if I'm learning, I'm selfish. I'm selfish, and I'm happy if I'm learning. It was about the founder sell, right?
Yeah.
And you brought that to the front, and that was the point of the newsletter was about the founder is selling, right? And that's kind of our founder-led sales mantra, and that's like all the companies that we've seen be successful. The founder is the steward of revenue forever, and at the beginning they're selling, and they go through different kind of roles over time. But like, take me through that of how you've seen that kind of, why that's become such a powerful kind of force or come to the forefront of your thinking.
Yeah, because I was taught through kind of everything I've ever read and seen about startups is that you're supposed to research and validate first and then sell later. Right? Like that's everything we were ever taught. And that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Because basically the only way you can validate is by selling. Sales, this is like selling is research. You learn what customers are trying to do in reality. And you can learn if, your 400 customer interviews, like what parts of them were lying based on what customers do when you're trying to sell to them. And so I view sales as like the foundational research that any founder needs to be doing. Yeah, we're not going to be great at it. We didn't get into the game to sell most of the time. We're mostly product people or nerds or whatever we are, but you don't have to be great at sales to become a student of it and like observe what customers are actually trying to accomplish and how they behave in calls. And when you view it that way, right, like that's the way you figure out your business. You don't go out and do a bunch of like nonsense research and stuff in advance, because when you do all that research and stuff, you're going to learn a bunch of things. You're not sure which are relevant and you're not sure which are true. So whenever you wind up going out there and trying to sell, you wind up in the pain cave, confident that everything that you were taught before was right and customers are wrong now. And like, that's a great place to be if you want to suffer.
How would you describe sales?
Sales is helping people accomplish what they're trying to accomplish.
Right. Versus trying to manipulate people to do something that they either don't want to do or hadn't planned on doing.
Yeah, I had this like, there's these, like, everyone has
you
such
speak about sales differently than everyone else talks about sales. I mean, not everybody, but yeah.
So I might be crazy here. So you can tell me if
you
I'm
are. You
I'm,
are, but go on.
Okay, fair. But like, I don't think I've ever convinced anybody to do anything they don't want to do. And I'm like, I feel like I could be pretty persuasive if I wanted to, if I like really put my soul into it. What I found is just like, if they don't want to do something, I can't convince them to. I can't force somebody to buy my product. I can't manipulate them. And so it's like sales isn't really pitching. It's like, hey, what are you trying to do? Can I help you with that? Yes, no. If you're not trying to do anything that I can help you with, cool. I'm not selling to you. There's nothing I can change there. And so, my read is that everyone thinks that sales is like persuasion and pitching and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's just like helping somebody accomplish something that they're trying to do.
I agree. And I think where sales goes wrong, you see with a lot of young people or early in their career, is that like they think showing all the buttons is the sale. I feel even hypocritical. I mean, I've learned, but that was me in the early days. Show them the buttons. And you know what? When the product team launches more buttons, show them more buttons, because that must be important because we built it. Only to realize that it's research. It's a discovery called Uncover. Is there anything of value that we can actually offer this person? And then showing them what we can offer of value or pain solution, et cetera. So it's an interesting thing because everyone's like, sales is dirty.
Yeah.
Yet you're describing it as research, but it's nuanced research. So how would you describe it? It's different than research, or you just call it research? Like, what is I can guess at what you're going to say, but I want to hear it from you. Like, what's the difference between research and sales?
Research you pay to do, sales pays you. I don't know. Like the way I think of sales as closed loop research, aka you can actually figure out if what you're learning is real based on whether or not they pay.
Maybe I would add that there's a decision for them to be made, right? Research is just give me feedback. Sales is research plus, hey, conclude this with a decision. Are we moving forward or not?
And that decision that they make, that again, you can't force on them,
as much as we want to.
as much as we would like to, that tells you something. That closes a loop that you can look back at the conversation up until then, the things they said, and assess what was real or not. That's super important. Because whenever you do discovery interviews, whenever you do kind of like any sort of open-ended research, don't even get me started on surveys, you don't know if they're lying or not.
Right.
Sales is the only way to figure out if they are lying. The other thing though, so that's the closed loop part. The other part I like is I think of this as like it's inline research, which means it is something that is happening as part of the core functions of the business. Basically, if you're doing sales well and doing research through the sales process and delivering well, you don't have to do other stuff. Research, how we typically think about it, is like, okay, let's put sales over here and we're gonna kind of pause on sales. I'm not gonna worry about that for a while, and we're gonna go do a research project, right? And that's a separate thing. But if you figure out sales in the process of selling, if you do research in the process of selling, you're building a business at the same fucking time. So why not do it all as one thing?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't happen because of Snyder's law, named after yourself. So for those who haven't heard of it, I can't imagine anybody's missed out on Snyder's Law. That was the first newsletter that I think I responded to that. I was like, this is it, man. Like, you're speaking my language. Tell everybody about Snyder's Law.
It's anything that I as a founder can use as an excuse to avoid sales, I will use as an excuse to avoid sales. Is there a big conference? Do I need to go fundraise? Did we get some feedback that I like? Literally any excuse in the world can be used as an excuse to not do sales. Now, they also may be good things to do. But if you're doing these things to avoid sales, and you got to look into your own soul to know, it's bad. And so, like, basically what I've seen is there are many founders out there who are like me. I named the law after myself because I'm very guilty of it, not because I'm above it. Where basically we just like, okay, we're not going to do outreach today because XYZ. We're not going to prioritize following up on this sales call I just had because there's other things. There are other fires. There are always other fires. There's always an excuse. You just have to say, listen, it's my job. This is the core thing that I've got to do as a founder, and don't let yourself fall victim to Snyder's Law.
Do you think people are avoiding sales because it has a negative connotation, or it challenges the ego in that your idea and your baby and this reason that you started this whole endeavor is not what you thought it was?
I think it's a mix of a couple of things. I think it's a mix of those. I think it's just people don't know how to do sales well. They might look at sales as something that's beneath them. That's for other people. Like, I think it's a mix of everything. It just sucks because too many startups die because founders don't have a chance to figure them out because they don't try to sell.
It's interesting. We interviewed a founder the other day who've gone through many of these phases, and he was talking about the research phase of it and kind of talking through his product or the value with clients. At some point, as he iterated through many versions, they started pulling the product, and it was like, "Ooh, can we test this? Can we use this?" So you talk a lot about pushing and versus pulling. Like, can you talk a little bit about how you see that in reality of when you start to feel that, or what that pulling feels like?
Yeah, I think pull is like the least understood concept in the world, and it's like the most important one. And so basically there's some amount of effort that needs to happen to get a deal done and to get somebody onboarded and successful onto whatever you're selling. That effort can be done by you dragging them through it as best as you can, or it can be done with the customer pulling you for the next step. So it would be like, they describe what they're working on. You say, oh, actually, this is kind of relevant. We're working on this thing. And they're like, really? Tell me more, right? They're like leaning in and pulling the information out of you. Wait, how exactly would that work for us, right? That's different than you trying to like make them interested in it. And then when you're done with the discovery call or whatever your first call is, then saying, hey, you know what I'd really like to do? I want to bring in these other people. Can we talk again tomorrow? Right? That's them pulling for next steps versus you trying to convince them that they should take the next steps and tell you who else in the company needs to be involved. And same thing for every step in the process from outreach all the way through success post-sale. The extent that you can design around customers pulling and figure out what they want to pull and why, right? Like all the physics of your go-to-market engine and of your business generally operate differently.
I love it. And I think I think about applying many of these principles back to the sales process, because if you're talking to a sales rep and it's clear that they're an expert at a thing and you start talking about it, kind of like when you start talking, I'm like, oh, this is, give me more. This is really interesting, right? Like in the ideal world, I guess also with founders, given that they're committing a big part of their life to solving this problem or living in this space and becoming an expert at, they can leverage that for conversations. Like, how do you see them as like getting those research conversations, getting that kind of building that credibility, getting to the point that people are kind of pulling more out of you?
Yeah, I mean, and in my experience, they start pulling when you say, hey, I was actually just talking to somebody else who was trying to accomplish something very similar to what you just mentioned. Like, that's the point where it's like, yeah, you can be the expert, but if you're like, hey, I heard that you're focusing on this project. I just talked with this other person who's similar, who's also focused on this project. It makes sense for me to talk to you about how they thought about it. Yes, 100%.
So that's selling, in my opinion, because that's what a good salesperson would do, right? That's what the founder is doing because they're now the expert, right? If you think about a salesperson or a founder, they're having more conversations than anybody else about this specific thing.
Yes.
The founder is actually dedicating their life to it. The salesperson is dedicating some of their career phase to it, but it's still kind of getting deep there. Now, you keep talking about pull, but you also talk a lot about demand, and that is also something sales, founder selling, I think, is risen in kind of potency in your newsletter. Demand is also rising up there. I have some graph running in the background of keywords that you use to see where you're trending. But talk about demand a little bit, because I think that's the, it's zooming out of this a little bit, but I think demand is obviously important.
Yeah, demand is basically the substrate of everything we've talked about. It's the thing underlying why people pull. Why do people buy things at all? It's not because we have pretty software. It's not because we've poked and prodded at their pain points and problems and evangelized a great solution. Like, that's not how the world works. Demand is like, why does somebody buy something? Well, people buy things when they are trying to accomplish something in their lives. I don't control that. They have like this to-do list in their brain. And on that to-do list, they can prioritize like one thing at a time. Based on whatever they prioritize, they try to figure out, how do I accomplish that thing? And if your product is a good fit for that project in their brain, the thing they're trying to accomplish, they will pull. They have demand. If not, sucks to suck, not happening. And so our job is not to go out and convince people they have demand. It's to go out and understand, what is that project on someone's brain when they are when our product is a good fit for them? Who is that person? And who else is in a similar situation that when we show up, they say, oh my gosh, where have you been my whole life, and pull. Demand is the thing that underlies all of this, and it's that project in their brain that makes our product relevant.
So let's get I want to take this in, there's a few different directions, but let's go back to the beginning of kind of making this practical. So you have a founder who's in the pain cave, or they're going through this and they're listening to us and they're like, I want to avoid the pain cave, so maybe my idea isn't real. Let me talk to customers or prospects. How are you seeing, or in your experience, how are you engaging with prospects outside of your network to try to generate those research or sales calls in the beginning? Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck is they don't know how to do outbound. They don't know what it is. Like, they got their network. Once you churn through that, what do you do?
What do you do? Yeah, I mean, this is fun too. You know what doesn't work for doing outbound before you know what you're selling is doing salesy outbound. Yeah, I can guarantee you, you don't have the right words, and no permutation of what you send is going to work. So what I've seen people do is send outreach that's like, hey, I'm working on this. Would love to get you involved in some way, or would love to get your feedback on it. Would you be open to a chat? Right, just something like that. And the goal is to talk to 5, 10, 15, 20 potential people per week, every single week.
So those numbers again? Sorry, what is it?
Minimum 5.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to depend on the size
I get
of your
it, but
blah, blah, blah. But like my goal is 10.
Okay.
Like my target's 10. I've seen people do 15, 20. When you get to 20, it starts to get hard to manage your own calendar. So, especially if there's follow-ups.
It'd also be a good sign that people are really interested in talking about that.
Yeah, but the way I think about it is you're getting people on a call by any means necessary. Just saying like, hey, I'm a cool person. Do you want to talk? Is essentially the thing. Because remember, this demand thing, you're testing for demand in these calls. And this demand thing exists no matter how you get them on the call. It's an independent property of their brain, whether or not they have demand. And so you get them on a call by any means necessary. And then you just have a nice conversation and try to figure out if there is actually demand there and what their demand is. And if they have demand, they will tend to pull for more information about what you're working on, and then you do a second call.
I love it. All right, now moving further along, and I know you claim to not be a sales expert, although that's the best salespeople say that about themselves, but the first sales hire, do you have any kind of frameworks or how you think about when to make your first sales hire or when not to? I mean, I'd love to unpack that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so like there are some really good, there's like a couple of like unicorns out there who can be basically dropped into any kind of environment and like figure it out. They're like 150 IQ horsepower people who are in sales who love the 0 to 1 stage. And like, if you hire one of them, they'll probably figure it out.
And I'd almost challenge you to say those people aren't in sales because they're in the 0 to 1 unicorn phase. And as soon as you start actually doing the repeatable selling process, they're bored.
Yeah, they're bored. Yeah. So it's a kind of like, there's a kind of person who can do that, but generally you don't want to design around finding that person, and instead you want to like hire a normal salesperson when it's time to hire a normal salesperson. And so basically the way I think about when to hire a salesperson is when you're no longer surprised in calls. When you say essentially the same thing and you can predict based on what you say and like you have a couple slides or whatever, are they going to get to the next step? Yes, no? And is your prediction right? And like, do they wind up buying? Once you have that with pretty much a repeatable script, then you can bring in a salesperson. And you just like, I just don't assume that a sales hire is going to be able to figure out what works. I assume they're going to be able to do what I do, but like with much better sales skills.
Right. But there's like, it'll net out, right? They lose the founder skills, they get the sales IQ and some wisdom on sales pipeline management. Yes. So that's a really good rule of thumb. So the process needs to be repeatable enough that the sales hire will repeat whatever you're doing. So whatever you're doing, if it's repeatable and with some margin of error will continue to work, you're good. But if it's not repeatable, then they're just going to repeat whatever you're doing, which isn't kind of predictable or doesn't result in regular success and was just fizzle out, I guess, or fail.
There's like no real founder magic left in the sales process. It's like, it's not just like you creating miraculous things and like connecting them to an investor so they buy, right? And like that kind of thing. It's now like, okay, I've got 3 slides that I show. I have 3 discovery questions that I ask. Based on what I hear and based on like, I know I'm targeting these people, I'm getting a number of meetings with them. Based on that, I know what's going to happen. And yeah, once you're at that spot, you're like in a good. You
got to be really honest with it. Why I'm laughing is you hear founders that will join a call, they'll promise something on the roadmap to get the deal done. They get off and they're like, "Look, 1 call, 1 close. Look how easy it is." And you're like, "But I would never be able to commit to something on the roadmap to win a deal. Like you have superpowers that I like is not repeatable, unless you want me to promise everything, and then in which case we'll get a lot of wins real quick, and then this thing's going to go sideways."
Yeah.
What about investor pressure? So that's been a theme for founders in the early days. And I imagine it just gears it up, turns up the volume. on all of the steps you're going through, but how do you see founders kind of navigating investor pressure in the early days when they've kind of committed I mean, is it they commit a little bit that they think they have product market fit, or they do to the investors, and the investors are investing in that product market fit, and then they realize they kind of dote because they're in the pain cave, and like, what's your take on all of that? I know it's an obtuse question, but
Yeah, investors are a fun topic because, like, basically, founders lie to investors and investors lie to themselves. Then investors say nonsense to founders and founders lie to themselves. Like, and so it's just like this weird thing where, like, we have no idea what's going on, and often your investors have no idea what you're working on, even if they're like somewhat close to you. So here's what I've tended to see is like.
So do investors like you, Rob, after you say that? Where do you stand with investors?
I wrote an article once called "Investors Are Structurally Stupid," and I got the most outreach from investors who were like, "That's the greatest article I've ever read."
Very good. So they're
yeah, I mean, some definitely hate me, but the ones who do probably are the biggest offenders.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I typically see is we present very rosy pictures to investors. And they create some sort of a mental model of our business based on that. And then they look at the like monthly updates and don't see this happening necessarily. They kind of like see maybe a little bit of that happening. And then they usually come, and when they see that happening, in their minds are like, okay, something's off here. Should they hire in sales? Right? And so then you typically get asked the question, well, what if you hired some BDRs? What if you hired some salespeople? And that is
well, and what if you hire a VP of sales? Because they'll often advise that. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, God bless on that one. Basically, what they're offering solutions, but what they're really saying is, shouldn't this be growing faster? Which you can misinterpret and say, well, if our investors say we should hire a VP of sales, or ask if we should hire a VP of sales, why don't we start the search for that right now? Right? We've just gotten
that's something we can
permission.
Control. That's a fun thing. Hiring people, we're a real company now.
Yeah. We just raised $4 million or whatever. And so I think it's like, it's trying to like understand what's underneath what your investors are suggesting or kind of like asking, and not steering straight into the iceberg to the extent you can avoid it by like taking what they're saying at face value. They're asking like, how does this company grow faster? Okay, cool. There's a variety of ways to solve for that.
Right. And hiring salespeople when you don't need them, or this horsepower, to your point, when it's not repeatable, just puts more. So just a big, expensive distraction that prolongs the inevitable, which is getting back to what is the repeatable process.
Yeah, and it's like it actually like pretty much guarantees that you won't figure out the repeatable process, because now you're like onboarding people and managing people, and your time is spent on things that aren't the thing that matters.
That's so much fun, though. It gets employment rates up. It's such a short-term thrill. What did we miss? We're getting near the end. You've been very respectful of your time. What do you think that founders should know that we didn't talk about today?
Startups unfold. They evolve. The way that you get to become a big company is not a linear path. And evolution happens in the process of selling and serving customers. You find some customers really love you that you thought would, and cool, great, you're right. But you find some customers that you thought would love you really hate you. And in that process, you figure out what the real case study is that you're repeating and who says hell yes to it. And you figure out who is that relevant to. And it often leads to a product that is shaped differently than what you started with. And what matters is that you pay attention to that and you observe that. Like, that is the job of the founder, is to not just sell and try to validate that you're right. It's to figure out what right is. And as you figure that out, the business, it doesn't pivot, it evolves. And as it evolves, it takes a shape and answers questions that you couldn't have planned for, and turns into something that you couldn't have anticipated in advance. And that's basically how reality works. Everything else, all the planning that we try to do, all the like stuff in advance, the 30-year plan or whatever people tend to do these days is cool. All of that is getting in the way of figuring out what reality's design constraints are and building something that evolves as reality does. And if you embrace this unfolding process, you'll wind up not thinking so much about the long-term future and things you can't control. And you wind up serving customers in very interesting ways and creating a business that really delights a market and takes a shape that you couldn't have anticipated. And that's how the world works. We just pretend it works otherwise.
I love it. I love it. That was so good. Well, I'll get you out of here on this question. It's usually meant to end conversations, but I'm afraid it may start a new one. But if you can narrow down the worst sales advice that you've gotten or the biggest misconception that you see into one thing, what's the worst advice you think people are getting on sales?
Yeah, so it is, I'll give it specifically for founders. The worst piece of advice you could ever receive is that sales is about pitching, research is about learning. When you hear that piece of advice, I don't advocate physical action, but the reason that is so bad is because it misinterprets sales and causes you to avoid and delay it. And that kills your company. Sales is research. Sales is how you learn what people are really trying to accomplish. And if you think it's persuasion, you're going to be really bad at sales.
I love it. I love it. And the way you describe it, though, and hopefully what founders take from this is it's so much easier. It's not as scary, right? It's an easier, it's a conversation. Yeah, I love it.
It's really interesting when you don't start showing up to these calls like stressed out of your mind thinking you got to persuade people, but you show up and you're like, I'm actually curious to see how they're approaching this. And it works better when you're that anyway.
I love it. All right. So where can people find you, Rob?
I shout into the abyss on LinkedIn. You can find me there. And then I write a free newsletter, Substack every week.
I'm a big fan of both. And I'm sure your editor asked you this, but I'll ask you too. I don't need to put you on the spot. When's your book going to be available for?
It is due to my editor.
We're forecasting.
On March 1st. And depending on how many edits. No, so it's literally coming out, I think, fall of 26. So
Okay.
Don't hold your breath.
I'm holding, man. Well, we get your newsletter.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's influencing the book and vice versa because
The book is actually a love story. I don't know what you're waiting for.
Yeah,
it's a very steamy romance.
About finding product market fit.
No, yeah, something like that.
Awesome, Rob. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, when I'm learning, I'm happy. And selfishly, I learned a lot today. So thank you so much for joining us.
It was fun. Thanks, Seth.
See you.